We're here to continue our study of the Holy Land that we went on our trip. And just a real quick introduction for the couple that weren't here and anybody who might watch it later. Rachel and I and our family took a trip along with a bunch of other people to Israel in 2019. And we want to look at is the places that we went, the things that we saw. But more than that, we want to talk about what the significance those things have biblically to the Bible and what that then means for our lives. For anybody who was on the trip or gone on the trip is not displayed in the slides chronologically as we went through the land of Israel, but rather is organized in chronological fashion as we go through the scriptures and through the story of God. Because really the Bible is God's story. It's the story of how God created the world and then how humankind basically messes it up, and then it's the rest of it is God's plan, the story of redemption. The story of Jesus is really the story. And what's really neat is he invites us, his children, to kind of have a part in that story. And that's true for the people in the Bible, and it's true for us here today. So with that in mind, let's start with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this church, Lord. We thank you for your Son, Jesus, for this opportunity to learn about where he was, where he walked, where he lived, and all of the many blessings that you've given to the people back in the time of the Bible, and that you still continue to provide to us here today. Help us to enrich in our faith and our minds with this time together. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so real quick, where is Israel? It's a long way away. This is much quicker to experience it sitting here in the comfort of your sanctuary than having to fly all the way across the ocean to get there. How big is Israel? It's small, right? There's Texas superimposed over the Middle East. How big is Israel? It's small. It's a little place. It's a little place. It's amazing, though, how God chooses to work through the little things in life, not the great, big, strong, powerful things. Anyway, we went to Mount Sinai last week, and we saw that. And we also went to Megiddo, and we talked at pretty good length about Megiddo. And today, we want to move ahead to the city of Bet Shan. Bet Shan. Okay, Bet Shan is one of those cities that I'm sure you've probably never heard of unless you remember from when we kind of started this presentation the last time. But Bet Shan is a city that does show up in the Bible in a few places, particularly in the Old Testament. And I want to look at there in 1 Samuel chapter 31 is one of the places we're going to encounter Bet Shan. Now, what was really neat was when we did this the first time, we had just finished going through part of the life of the great man of God, David. And so this was really fresh on your minds. But I think we can get back here. 1 Samuel, which is, of course, largely the story of Samuel and the story of the early years of King David. And here we're going to run into the town of Bet Shan, verses 7 through 10. There it starts at verse 7. It says, "When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and they fled." Okay, so what's going on here? What's going on is Saul's been out chasing David through the wilderness for 7 long years, and he has to take a break to do that because there is a major Philistine invasion. So Saul drops what he's doing chasing David, goes out, gets his army together, fights the Philistines, and what happens? They lose. They lose. And Saul, Jonathan, and his sons are killed. That's right. Okay. So they abandoned their towns and they fled. And the Philistines, they came and they occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and they stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor, that's Saul's armor, in the temple of the Asheroths and fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done to Saul, Okay, all the village men journeyed through the night to Beth-shan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beth-shan and went to Jabesh, where they buried them. Okay, so where is Beth-shan? So if we looked at our map here, up on the screen, up in the right-hand corner, Beth-shan is in the north. Okay, Beth-shan is in the north of Israel. Now, we don't have the northern kingdom yet. This is the time of Saul, and soon to be about the time of King David. So we have all one Israel. And Beth-shan is up here in the north. It's on the eastern portion of Israel near the Jordan River, okay? It is located very near this place called Mount Gilboa, which I don't think I have on that map. I don't. Mount Gilboa is a major mountain all around that dominates sort of the scenery all around there, because a lot of these mountains that we have in Israel are singular peak mountains. You know, right? Part of the problem we have is when we picture mountains here in Texas, we usually are like, okay, we went to New Mexico, Colorado, right? We think mountains, and you see a whole range of mountains going from one side to the other. But here in Israel, when they talk about a mountain, it's not a whole range of mountains. It is, like one mountain out there in the middle of a plain. And that's the way Mount Gilboa is. And Beth-shan is located on a hill near that. Now, in this picture, there's some girl who wouldn't get out of the way as I tried to take this picture. Nah, just kidding. Here we are, we're standing and we're looking at Beth-shan. And we've really got two different cities that we're looking at as we look at Beth-shan. Behind her, on top of that hill, you see that big hill there? That's not Mount Gilboa, that is Beth-shan proper. When they're talking about here in 1 Samuel chapter 31, they're saying the people all ran away because the Philistines won the battle, and they took over Beth-shan, and they desecrated Saul's body there. They were on top of that hill. Beth-shan is on top of the hill. It's a city. It looks just like Megiddo, what we talked about last week. Okay? It is the city on top of the hill. It's got a water source. It's got all that same kind of stuff going on. Now, what then is all this down on the valley floor below Beth-shan? Well, that is the Roman city of Beth-shan. Okay? When the Romans come along, the Romans decide they don't want to build their city on top of the hill. They want to put their city down on the flat. Now, what are some advantages of putting the city on the flat instead of up on top of the hill? You don't have to climb the hill. Yeah, you don't have to climb the hill every time you want to get into town. Exactly. What other advantages are there to being on the flat? Yes, Jason. Yeah, there's a lot more room. If you build down in the plains instead of on top of the hill, you have a lot more room to build. You can build a lot more things. You can have a great big wide streets, and you can have amphitheaters, and you can have temples, and you can have granaries and markets and all sorts of things because you've got lots of room. If you build your city out where you've got lots of room. Now, we here in Texas can appreciate that. We have lots of flat open space, yes? Right? We're not all hemmed in by a bunch of mountains or trying to build on top of a little hill. We've got lots of room. Well, the Romans were like the first Texans. They wanted to be where there was lots of room to spread out. And so the Romans, when they come and invade, they're going to build the Roman city down on the flat. Now, we talked a little bit last week. What is the advantage of building on top of the hill? You have the high ground, you have better defense, right? It's much more defensible on the top of the hill. It's true today. Hey, if you want to defend something, you should build it on the top of the hill. It was also true in the ancient world as well. It is much more defensible. So why, if you're a big Roman conquering army, are you not worried about defense? Yeah, because the Romans have legions. They dominate not just one little town or one little spot. They dominate everything, everywhere. They don't build city walls. They're not worried about defense because they're just that powerful. They don't worry about that, which is, by the way, not unlike our cities today. Do we build walls around our cities? No. Do you have to go through moats and towers and things to get into town? No. Why? Because we don't daily worry about whether or not the city's about to be invaded by barbarians or not, although maybe we should be, but we're not. We're not. Okay, so we've got two different cities going on here at Bet Shan. We've got two different cities. We've got the Roman city and we've got the ancient city. And what's interesting about them is they both play a biblical role. Okay? Which city is going to be prominent at the time of Jesus? The Roman city. Yeah, the Roman city is going to be prevalent at the time of Jesus. In the earlier times, like here in the time of Saul, the old Israelite city on top of the hill is going to be prevalent. So we want to talk about those just a little bit. So first, we've talked a little bit about the time of Saul. Saul gets killed. They nail his body to the wall up there at Bet Shan. That wall is still there. You can climb up on top of that mountain, and you can go see the spot that they believe they did that, because they know where the temple is, and we know which wall that was. So you can actually go see where they did that to the King Saul. We didn't go see that, though, because we were given 10 minutes to see both cities. No, we were given a little bit more than that, but it felt about like 10 minutes. Is that not true? Yeah, pretty much. It was like 20 minutes. It was like 20 minutes. Did you go up and see the wall? Okay, well, you want to tell us about the wall? Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty big hill. That's right. So we're going to instead spend our time talking a little bit more about Bet Shan, the Roman city, because Bet Shan, the Roman city, is actually one of the best preserved Roman cities in all of the world. Okay? This is a city that's going to rival even the great Pompeii for how well preserved it is. It's that good. It's definitely top 5 in all the world, best Roman preserved cities anywhere. Okay? Now, why is that? Why is the city of Bet Shan so preserved? Any guesses? Yes, but why? What happened to it? Any guess? It's out in the desert. Yeah, well, it's right there down by the River Jordan. It's kind of deserty. That's true. Jason, you have a guess. The historian from the back. What is your guess, Jason? Good guess that at the time of the Muslim invasion of this part of the world that they leave it alone. The answer is actually no, but good guess. So it's a Roman city dating roughly from 66 BC all the way to 749 BC. So for almost 800 years, this is a significant Roman town. And what's going to happen on January the 18th, 1749, there is a massive earthquake that happens in this part of the world. There is a big earthquake on January 18th, 749 AD. The town is utterly destroyed, and it gets covered up in the sand, dust, and debris, and is not inhabited again. Okay, so now Jason's not entirely wrong with his supposition. This is also coinciding closely with the invasion of the Muslims and the retreating of the Byzantine Christian Empire. And so what happens is when it is destroyed in the earthquake, there's basically no civilization left around right at the time to go and build it up again. So it gets buried and lost to time. So we have all of your traditional Roman things. You've got the Roman bathhouse over here on the left. You have got these These are the piping networks that go along with bathhouse up on the top right-hand side, where basically when you're going to go take a Roman bath, Romans don't just take one bath. You always take at least 2 to 3 baths. You take a bath in cold water, you take a bath in lukewarm water, and you take a bath in hot water. Now, which one do you do first? You start with the lukewarm water, okay? And you get yourself saturated. Then you go into the hot water. And why do you go in the hot water? Because you get in the hot water because that opens up all your pores and it lets all the greases and oils and nasty stuff come out. And then you go from the hot and you jump into the cold. Yeah, you jump into the cold. And that is how you go about washing yourself in the ancient Roman world. And so you've got these different pools laid out where the people do this, and you have these giant fires, and you have piping networks, and you have all this that makes all this happen. And you can go see all that. It's all still there in Bet Shan. Bet Shan's not the only place we see this. There's other places throughout the world that have the bathhouses still. But it's a pretty impressive structure, the bathhouse. Now, here is the main street. We're walking down the main street of Bet Shan, the Roman town. On the side of the streets, you've got these beautiful mosaics. You have got marble that we have paved the sidewalks with. So the street proper, where like the carts and the chariots and things, that's what they're walking down right here. And that's these great big basalt, heavy, hard, big stones are down on that street. You've got a curb. You can see the curb there, and up on the curb you've got these marble pathways. And they've restored, or still are there, the columns. And what those columns represent is those are going to be sort of like an old western town. Those are the storefronts of all of the major buildings as you go downtown. Those are the columns being the front of where all those would have been. And as you go down through there, you've got, various temples to various pagan gods up and down there. You've got the law courts. You've got all sorts of official buildings right there in the center of town, because the Romans build their towns in basically the same way everywhere they go. Everywhere they go, they have the same towns. So you can see portions of this in other places, but you've got it here. Do you want the long version or the slow version? The long version. Okay, the long version. Okay, so we have every major Roman city has a patron god or goddess of the Roman god pantheon to which they particularly worshiped. And we see that in this city as well. So we have the, over here on the right-hand side, at the top of this column, you have a figure there carved in the rock there. And that figure happens to be the patron Roman god of Bet Shan. Does anybody know who that is? Yeah, it is. It's Dionysus or Pan. Okay? Dionysus or Pan is the Roman patron god of Bet Shan. And that is his portrait right there. You saw the grapes in the hair. If you see that, maybe you can see that. There in the hair, you've got a fig of grapes. That, of course, is the wine, signifying the wine of the partying Dionysus. Yeah, very good. Very good. Impressive, Nancy, impressive. Okay. Uh-huh. How did you know? Genius. Genius. Yeah, Dionysus. That's who that is. Okay, so how do we know that the city was destroyed in 749 on January the 18th AD? Yeah, we have coins. Remember we talked a little bit the other week about coins. One of the best ways that you can date any event historically is by the coins you find there. Why? Because just like our coins today, if you pick up a coin, what does it have on the coin? It has the year it was minted. Now, they didn't exactly put the year they were minted, but the coins had special significance to the rulers and people who mint them, and they typically changed them year to year. Okay? And so we have coins dating right up into 749, but not in 750. And we found those coins together with lots of other coins underneath this pillar right here. You see this guy in the green shirt? His name's Dan. Anyway, Dan, we'll call him Dan. Dan, standing there, underneath that column that had fallen over, there was a body of a man. And the man had several bags full of coins. Now, in those coins, we find dating right up to 749, but not past that. Now, I told you something which you didn't challenge my assertion. How do I know that it was destroyed by an earthquake? How do I know that it wasn't destroyed by barbarians invading? Or how do we know it wasn't destroyed by a flood? Or how do we know it wasn't destroyed by some other natural force? How do we know an earthquake? Because the Romans are excellent record keepers. Good guess. No. There's a giant crack in the earth. No. No. Yeah, because what happens is the way that the buildings have collapsed, they all collapse in one direction. Interestingly enough, they all collapse in one direction, as though there's a one great violent shake that causes the buildings to all collapse in one particular direction. And we know that there were some either what you'd call aftershocks or before shocks, because there are very few bodies found here at Bet Shan. Okay, unlike Pompeii, you go to Pompeii and you've got lots of bodies. You've got lots of people because, of course, the volcano blows up and it happens very suddenly. The people can't get out. You get lots of bodies. Here at Bet Shan, you have very few. Very few. So, but we do have this one character who gets caught under this pillar. And we can assume that he was most likely a looter, right? He's running around town gathering up everybody's valuables as everybody's leaving. And he's got them all in these bags with him when the thing falls on him. Yeah. And like I said, the earthquake is so catastrophic that nobody even comes back and picks it all up later. It's just left there with this guy. Interesting kind of stuff. Anyway, a lot of this is typical Roman kind of stuff. This thing down here on the right-hand side is the bathroom. These are your toilets right over here on the right-hand side. There's running water down through there. You kind of take your squat, and the water takes it away. So that's the Romans where they use the bathroom. This is one of their pagan temples right here. This is where they're going to have these fire pitches here. There's an altar there. And then there's the main high altar up on the top where they're going to do animal sacrifices. They're going to do all their pagan rituals happening there at the pagan temple. Okay, you got lots of stuff going on. Who's that person up there in the red? That's you? Huh, got you there. Look at that. How cool is that? Okay. Oh, wrong way. And we, of course, have a theater. Like all Roman towns, you have a fancy theater. Now, here's kind of the main seating. This is the stage, and the people are out there, and this is where all of the action goes on. You've got all of the backstage stuff going on there as well. And what I was amazed by is the sophistication with which this theater is built. There are all sorts of secret passages and back doorways to get in and out of all sorts of things. Now, can you see how that could be useful if you're setting on lots of dramas and plays and all sorts of things? Well, anyway, I found one of these. I was wandering, and I went up this random little staircase, and there's me up on the top of the theater. If you can see my little shape up there. This little bitty stairway that, I mean, you could be 5 foot from the staircase and you wouldn't see it. Anyway, it's a really neat place. There's stuff underneath. There's stuff underneath the stage. There's things that go up, things that go down, all sorts of things. Everything that you might think of in a modern theater, it's all there 2,000 years ago in Bet Shan in Rome, out in the little city kind of in the middle of nowhere. Part of what we would call the Decapolis. Okay, Bet Shan is what in the New Testament we're going to call the Decapolis. which is the series of the 10 cities. And Jesus is many times going to go preaching in the Decapolis. So anyway, there's the theater. It's pretty neat. If you've seen a Roman theater, it looks like a Roman theater. But if you've never seen one, it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Okay. Bet Shan. Very nice. But let's move on from Bet Shan, because we need to talk about another place. Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel's famous mostly for, the slide gives it away, Elijah. Yeah? You knew that. You knew that. You didn't need me to tell you that. That's where Elijah is going to face the prophets of Baal. And we've got there a nice statue of, who's the guy with the sword? Any guess? That's Elijah. That's Elijah. And who's the guy he's stepping on? The prophets of Baal. It's funny, we don't often think of our clergy that way anymore. I mean, just wondering if you could imagine me coming up here and grabbing a sword and running somebody through with it. But that's what Elijah's going to do. If you remember the story, does anybody remember the story of Elijah with the prophets of Baal? Yeah, it's at the end of the 7 years. Remember, Elijah is going to pray to God, and he's going to say, God, don't let it rain for 7 years of famine. And of course, the people, are they pleased with Elijah that he does this or not pleased? Now, who here has cows and would like it if it didn't rain for 7 years? You're probably not going to be pleased with this guy Elijah. Well, Elijah says, look, I know you don't like me. You think I'm a terrible guy. So I tell you what, we're going to go up, we're going to on top of this mountain, and we're going to resolve our differences. We're going to find out whose God is the real God and whose isn't. Okay. So they all go up there, Elijah representing God, and the 500 prophets of Baal representing Baal. And they're going to build an altar in each one. Who's going to call down the fire from heaven? Of course, Elijah says, look, he makes fun of them. He gives them all day. And finally, he says, okay, it's your turn, Elijah. The first thing Elijah does is says, look, this is going to hurt you all if we do this now. You've got to dump 12 huge things of water, remember, on top of the altar, so that there's water running everywhere. In fact, they dig a trench around it, and they fill up the trench, and there's water running everywhere. And then Elijah, of course, prays to God, and God calls down the fire from heaven and burns up the altar, burns up the stones of the altar, burns up the trench, and singes the ground so that nothing will grow. Pretty emphatic answer there. It all happens right here on this place called Mount Carmel. So, where is Mount Carmel? It's up in the north again. You can see on this map, I do have Mount Gilboa up here. Mount Gilboa, just above the Israel. You've got Megiddo. Remember we talked about Megiddo? It's just right down the road here from Mount Carmel, just across the valley. Okay, good. And here is what it looks like from atop Mount Carmel. Okay, now this up in the top right-hand corner is the monastery is a Catholic monastery to Elijah, basically. The Carmelite Fathers, they're called. I even took a picture of their sign so you remember. And you don't want to be there after 5 o'clock because they will lock you in and you'll have to stay the night. And you don't want to do that. So don't get left there. But this is what the view looks like from Mount Carmel. And it's a good expression, I think, of what I'm talking about here in Israel. We have a singular mountain overlooking a wide plain. That's how all of these things look there in Israel. When they go up on top of the mountain, you're up on top and you're looking out over the plain. And of course, on the side of the mountain, we have agricultural stuff going on. So these things, you know what these are? Anybody know? Yes, olive trees. Those are olive trees growing. And down in the valley, you can see it is lush and fertile. Lots of farming going on down there. And that's the way it would have been in antiquity as well. That would have been all the lush, fertile ground down there, part of Israel. Good. Good. It was really distracting standing there, incidentally. It also happens to be the home of one of Israel's biggest Air Force bases, is down there in that valley. And the whole time you're standing there, fighter planes are flying around, taking off, landing, doing everything. But you can just pretend like that's not there. You don't have to see that in the picture. But it was distracting. It was kind of like, hey, could somebody tell them to knock that off for a few minutes? We're trying to have a biblical moment here, you know. But anyway. All right, so that is Mount Carmel. Let's see, do we have time? Oh, yeah, we got time. Good. Good, good, good. Any questions about Mount Carmel before we leave Mount Carmel? Any other insights, Shell, that you want to share? No? Jason has some. Yes, Jason. Yeah, it was kind of just like that, Jason. Yeah, where does the... Toted it up the hill. Yeah, in fact, I would suggest it probably came from the Mediterranean Sea. Because why? We've been in 7 years of what? Drought. There's probably not a whole lot of water around to just be had. They probably had to go where? All the way to the Mediterranean Sea to get it. Yeah, which is not far. It's not far. You can see on the map. It's not far. But still, if you want to carry a great big... I didn't take a picture of it, but the vases of water that were common at the time are about as tall as a person and about as wide around as a barrel. And if you fill that thing up with water, it's something on the order of 80 gallons. Does anybody have any idea how much 80 gallons of water would weigh? Yeah, a lot. Hundreds of pounds. Yeah, 700 or 800 pounds plus the weight of the jar that you got it in. So anywhere around 900 pounds, 1,000 pounds. Yeah, so this is a significant undertaking to carry that much water up the hill. Elijah is making a really strong statement. I mean, we read it and we think, man, that's a big statement. But I mean, if you imagine what it would have been like to be like, hey, dude, Mr. Rick, could you go down and, you know, by hand or with your donkey go carry this water up this hill? I mean, you're going to want to really see something. And boy, did they ever see something. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, so enough with the Old Testament. On to Bethlehem. Except Bethlehem's in the Old Testament, isn't it? Where do we find Bethlehem in the Old Testament? It's the city of David. It's the city where King David is from. Yeah? Where else do we find Bethlehem in the Old Testament? All you deep thinkers. David's ancestors lived there. Who are they? Jason? Boaz and Ruth. Yeah, the person we remember, Ruth. Ruth lives in Bethlehem. Actually, it shows up in a few other places earlier than that, but really it is tied very strongly to King David. Even the stories of Ruth and Boaz, as amazing as stories as they are, they're given their significance because of King David. And so, David being the greatest king that Israel ever had, and of course, with the exception of the one who's greater than David, right, who's going to come later. His significance is going to be important. Okay, so this is what Bethlehem looks like right now. Bethlehem is located in what we would call the West Bank, okay? Bethlehem is occupied by the Palestinians. Bethlehem is not a Jewish town. In fact, it is illegal for Israeli Jewish people to even go into Bethlehem. It is against the law. The part that they can be in is on the other side of this wall. And so you've got walls separating Bethlehem from the rest of Israel. And there you can kind of see the wall. Probably not what you'd expect to see when you think, man, we're going to go see Bethlehem. We want to go see it. That's probably not the way you picture it, but that's the way it looks. It looks right now. Bethlehem's down in the south. And just in case you didn't know, the people in Israel do pay close attention to American politics. Who is this on the wall? That's President Trump. And what is he saying there? He's got his hand on the wall saying, I'm going to build you a brother. Right? What is he talking about? He's talking about the border wall with Mexico. The border wall with Mexico is right there in Bethlehem in Israel. Yeah, amazing, huh? Another thing that I just couldn't get over the irony of is on this section of the wall, what do we have here? Yeah, we've got a dove, the dove of peace with an olive branch in its mouth, wearing a bulletproof vest in Bethlehem. Welcome to, right next to the sign that says, welcome to Bethlehem. Yeah, amazing kind of interesting place. So that's what Bethlehem kind of give you a feel for Bethlehem. Like I said, it's probably not what you'd imagine if you were imagining it in your mind, but that's the way Bethlehem today sort of looks. But that's not the part we came to see. We want to see what? We want to see the part that matters, where Jesus is born. And where Jesus is born, there is actually a series of churches right there where Jesus is born, and they're called the Church of the Nativity, appropriately named. And this is what the Church of the Nativity looks like. There's a picture of it. You're standing in the courtyard from the outside, looking at kind of the main portion of the structure there, the Church of the Nativity. Now, it's one of the oldest churches in the world, like it says there. Parts of it date all the way back to 339 A.D. Okay? Now, what happens in the 300 A.D.? We talked about this last week. Does anybody remember? St. Catherine's Monastery gets built. The Church of the Nativity is built. A lot of these places get built in the 300s A.D. What is significant about those 300s A.D.? Yeah, that is when the Emperor Constantine's mother decides to take a trip to the Holy Land. And she goes to the Holy Land with the 10th Legion of Rome and goes to all of the people who live there and says, show me the places that I've been reading about in my Bible. And she goes to Bethlehem, and there she's going to find the place where Jesus is born. And over that spot, they're going to build the original church of there where Jesus is born, the Church of the Nativity, and it's going to later get expanded over the centuries. Okay, it's going to start out as a relatively, hey, they put up a structure, but this is a pretty important place, yes, the place where Jesus is born, right? We have Christmas every year. It's a pretty big deal. Over the years, it gets bigger. So I note that here, that most of what we actually go and view gets built later by a guy named Justinian. Justinian is probably the most powerful, most significant of the Byzantine emperors. Now, the Byzantine Empire is basically the Roman Empire in the eastern part of the world. Once the whole Roman Empire falls apart in the west, in the east you get the Byzantine Empire, which is basically Rome existing for several hundred years after the fall of the Roman Rome. Rome gets sacked, destroyed, burned to the ground. They all go into the Dark Ages in the west, but in the east, the Roman Empire lives on, and we call it the Byzantine Empire. And their most important ruler is a guy named Justinian. The Byzantine Empire is a Christian empire. Basically from its founding to its dying breath, it is a Christian empire here in the east. And so under Justinian, they greatly expand this church. And that's largely what we see. One of the reasons why this is one of the oldest churches in the Middle East is because most of the churches in the Middle East, which would have been older, are going to get completely destroyed by the Muslims. Okay? When the Muslims come to power, Muhammad the prophet and his followers in the 7th, 8th centuries are going to come, and they're going to wipe out everything they can find. They don't, however, destroy this church. This is one place that they don't destroy. And legend has it, they don't destroy the church on account of the murals that are painted on the inside. You say, okay, what is on these murals? Well, if you were going to do a great big mural of Christmas, what would you have? What kinds of elements would you have on a mural about Christmas? What do you think? Any ideas? You'd have the nativity. You'd have Jesus in a manger, probably. Yeah, that's there. What else might you have? Shepherds. You might have angels. You might have the 3 wise men. Yeah, the 3 wise men might show up in a mural about Christmas time. Why would the 3 wise men be significant to these people, to these early Muslim invaders? Yeah, that's where they're from. They're dressed in Eastern, what we'd call today Iranian garb, wearing turbans, Persian garb. Those are their people. The legend has it, they don't destroy this church because when they go in the church to destroy it, they see on the murals the paintings of the wise men, and they recognize those as their people. And so they say, well, it doesn't seem right to destroy this church. And so the Church of the Nativity is spared the destruction that befalls most of the other churches that come earlier or that are at the same time. So that's one of the reasons why this is one of the oldest churches. And this is sort of what it looks like on the inside. It's very ornate. It is very much decorated in what we would today call like the Greek Orthodox tradition. Very laden with gold. Very, very fancy chandeliers. They have like the place where the priest or the pastor would sit is a throne, is basically like a throne that's fit for a king. Just everything about it is immaculately well done, in a way that to us is just extreme. I mean, it's truly extreme, but this is where Jesus is born. You know, it's sort of spare no expense kind of a situation here. This is another interesting story is the front door. This middle picture right here. This is the front door, or what was the front door to the church. Now, what do you notice? That lady that's standing there holding a microphone in her hand is a very short lady. She's about Julia's size. Okay? I mean, she's pretty short. And you notice how tall is that door compared to her? Yeah, it's even shorter. Why is the door so small? So the invaders can't get... Yeah, it has to do with the horses. See, one of the things that you do in the Middle East is when you conquer somebody's holy site, what you typically do is you turn it into a stable for your horses. Okay? When the Muslims conquer these places, they're going to do that. When the Christian Crusaders come back a few centuries later, they're going to go to the mosques and they're going to do the same thing. That's one of the things you do is you put your horses there. So to prevent them from using it for their horses, they brick up the door. The original door followed the pattern of that big archway and has been closed up later on. You go inside there, you go through a chamber, and you have the original door. This is an original wood oak door from the original church, and you can see it's much larger. It's probably 10 foot tall. Huge doors. Okay? But that's why. That's why. Okay, so that's the church. Very interesting, but that's not really where the interesting part happens. The interesting part actually happens, where's Jesus born? in the stable, which in the ancient Middle East was a cave. Yeah, so up underneath this church is a cave. And it is believed that in that cave is where Jesus himself was actually born. In fact, there's not only one cave, there's a series of caves through there. And as I said, there's not actually one church, there's actually three churches, because there's the original church, and that church is basically was controlled by the Eastern Orthodox folks. And then later on, once you have the split, 1000 AD, where the Eastern Orthodox don't get along with the Roman Catholics anymore, the Catholics decide, well, we can't let them have the only church, so right next to them, the Roman Catholics have built a church, and then on the other side, there's another church, an Armenian church, or a Coptic Christian church on the other side. There are caves under each one of them, and but the caves underneath the original Greek Orthodox Church is where we believe the actual birth of Jesus happens. But in these other caves, which look almost the same, are where some of famous saints and other kinds of people take up residence, living in these other caves. Okay, the most famous of which is a guy by the name of Jerome. Yeah, Saint Jerome. Anybody ever heard of Saint Jerome? Brain up there? You remember Saint Jerome? No? Saint Jerome is the guy who is going to translate the Bible into Latin. Okay, the Latin Bible, called the Vulgate, is written by Saint Jerome while he lives in these caves for years. He basically spends the second half of his entire life basically in a cave, near the cave where Jesus is born, largely by himself. And one of the things he works on is he works on creating the Latin Bible, the Vulgate, which is going to become the Bible for roughly the next 1,300 years until you get around to the time of the Reformation, basically. Until we get to the Reformation, the Vulgate is the Bible. Pretty much, period, end of story, the Bible. St. Jerome. Anyway, he's an important figure. And he's not a bad guy, okay? We want to make sure. Jerome is a good guy. In fact, his translation of the Bible is excellent. It is excellent. It's not perfect. Okay, there are a few errors that he makes, but truly and truly it is excellent scholarly work, especially for someone working in a cave, almost 1,800 years ago. Okay. This right here, so we've got the Grotto of the Nativity. This on the right-hand side, this is where Jerome lives. This is where Jerome lives. That picture right there is of the very spot where it is said that Jesus was born. Right there. There's a mark on the floor. You can crawl up on your hands and knees, and you can actually go and you can touch the spot. Okay. I didn't get to do that. They're not sure. But it's according to what we know from Catherine, who was there in the 300s AD, according to what the people who lived there told her, that was the spot. Is it the spot for sure? Don't know. It does fit. It does make sense. And, the contemporaries say that was it. Okay. I didn't get to go touch the spot. No, because the group that we were with was buddies with the Catholics. And the Catholics run the church next door. They don't run the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, anyway, I didn't go to the spot. Maybe some other time when I go to Israel, we'll go visit that exact spot. But there it is. That's the picture of what it looks like. Did you get to touch the spot? No. Oh, that's right. You didn't get to go to Bethlehem. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, Bethlehem's a pretty rough place. I tried to give you that with the pictures on the walls and stuff. But it's beautiful in the church and at the spot, but Bethlehem proper, not a good place. You wouldn't want to just go take a walk downtown, you and your sweetheart, and have a lovely afternoon there. Okay? No. Who knew? Yeah. But it's pretty important. All right, so from Bethlehem, where does Jesus grow up? In Nazareth. Now he's, of course, going to live in Egypt for a little while. But we weren't in Egypt. We're in Israel. So he's going to come back, and he's going to come back to Nazareth. Nazareth. Okay, what is significant that happens in Nazareth? We have the Church of the Annunciation. What is that? Yeah, in Luke chapter 2, we get the whole story of the angel that comes and visits Mary, Jesus' mom, and says, Mary, you're going to have a baby, and this is going to be a very special baby, Mary, and you need to name him Jesus, and he's going to save the people from their sins. And Mary says, okay, bring it on, right? According to tradition, that happens right where this church is, right there in the middle of Nazareth. You say, okay, well, how do you know that? Same thing, this is going to date back to the time of Catherine, St. Catherine, Constantine's mom, who's going to go and she's going to build a church right there. Now, that church does not survive. The original church is gone. It was destroyed. But this one was built right over the top of where that was. And this, right here, this well is the well that marks the spot where the angel is said to have come and visited Mary. That's the spot, right there. Pretty neat, pretty neat. That's the town where Jesus grew up. There's not a lot else in Nazareth really to see. No, because Nazareth is just kind of a modern town. So you have that church there, but the rest of it is largely, there's not much to see. There is no evidence of where Jesus actually lived. Where was the house that they lived in? Where was Mary and Joseph's house? Where did they live? That information has been lost. Nobody knows where that is. I would assume that when Catherine came through in the 300s, even by that time, that information had been lost. So even back then, they weren't able to identify where that was. And that's pretty significant because we're going to get other people's houses. I mean, we are going to know where Peter's house in Capernaum was. We're going to know where Jesus was sentenced to be killed. We know where he was born. We know the spot where he died. We know a lot of things. But where his mom and dad's house was in Nazareth is something we don't know. Don't know that. Okay? Yes, Jason? Yep. We'll get to that. Okay. From there, though, we need to go. Jesus has got to start his mission. He can't stay a kid forever. He can't stay a carpenter in a carpenter's shop forever. He has got to grow up, and he's got to start his mission. And so where does he go? He's going to go over to the Sea of Galilee. Okay. Where is the Sea of Galilee? Can you find it on the map? It's in Israel. Good. Partly, yeah. It's circled with a big red circle. It's up in the north. Okay, it's up in the north. The Sea of Galilee is the most significant source of fresh water in all of this part of the world. So why do they call it a sea if it's full of fresh water? Yeah, because it's big. It's big. At the time, in ancient times, any large body of water is going to be called a sea. Okay, they didn't have a distinction between seas and lakes and oceans and bays. And if it's a large, substantial body of water, it's a sea. So it gets called the Sea of Galilee, even though really it is a lake. Okay, it's a lake. Now, the Dead Sea down here is a sea. Okay, it is salt water. So salty water, salt water in the Dead Sea. But the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River are fresh water. And here we are standing in front of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, that's what it looks like. Now, one of the things that it's hard to appreciate about the Sea of Galilee is the Sea of Galilee is down in a hole. Way down in a hole. When you are in Nazareth, okay, on the map you see Nazareth. You're not far from the Sea of Galilee. Does anybody have any idea, you two who were there, how high is Nazareth compared to the Sea of Galilee? What's the elevation difference there between those places? Yeah, it's over 1,000 feet. It's like 1,200 foot down to get down to the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is way down in a hole. Okay, and it's a fairly deep sea. We actually talked about this last time. Does anybody remember how deep the Sea of Galilee is on average? You get out there in the middle, how deep is it? Yeah, it's like 300 or 400 foot deep. Sea of Galilee is a deep, deep hole. Geologically speaking, what's going on here? What do we have? We have a rift. Yeah, we have a rift. Yeah, it's a fault in the crust. It's a rift. It's basically a place where the earth has been pulled apart and you get just a super deep trench right there. All right where the River Jordan is, the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, all that is down in a rift in the earth's crust, and it is all way down in a hole. That's why the Dead Sea is literally the lowest place on the surface of the earth. Okay, I don't know if you knew that or not, but the Dead Sea is the lowest place on planet Earth. When you get to the Dead Sea, my friends, you have hit rock bottom. Okay? That's right. It is all uphill from here because you have hit rock bottom. Okay? Now, the Sea of Galilee is not far above that. Okay? It's not that far above that. So the Sea of Galilee is also way down the hole. What does it mean down the Sea of Galilee? It means it's hot. It is sticky. It is humid. There are bugs. Yeah, exactly. It's like Death Valley is also below sea level down in a hole. These are just further down in the hole, and they're wetter. Yeah. So a lot of people don't want to live there. In fact, to this day, that's the middle of nowhere up there. That is the middle of nowhere, okay? In fact, as you can kind of see there behind us, there's not a lot of towns, villages, skyscrapers. There should be. They're in the desert. This is the freshwater lake. There's a huge lake of fresh water out in the desert. The people should live there. Yeah, but just like Death Valley, they don't because it is hot and miserable there. No. Anyway, it also has to do with the kind of fish that you catch there. Of course, that's going to be very warm, fresh water. What do you catch in warm, fresh water? Tilapia. Yeah, the same thing you catch out on your power plant lakes out here in Texas because they're hot. Hot, fresh water, tilapia. Anyway, that's right. So that is the Sea of Galilee. It's a sea where we've got a lot of things going on biblically in and around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so it's almost 700 feet below sea level. It's the lowest freshwater lake on Earth. It's the second lowest lake on Earth. The Dead Sea being the lowest, of course. It has a depth of 140 foot in some places, up to 300 in others. And it is 13 miles wide, or 13 miles long and 8 miles wide. Pretty deep lake. Big. And here is a picture of us going down. You've got to go down the hill, way down the hill to get down there. Okay. So, what kind of fishing boat did they have? Well, as it just so happens in, what was the year? I think it was 2009? I might be making that up. Don't quote me that. in the last 10 or 15 years, they actually had a major drought there in the land. And when that drought, of course, happened, the water went down, and out there in the marshy mud of the receding water, they found a boat in the mud that had been preserved that dates to the 1st century A.D., which is a Galilean fishing boat. There it is right there. Which is, of course, the very type of boat that Peter and James and John would have had out there on that lake at the time of Jesus. And there's a lot of different ways that they go through, how it's constructed and how they do it. But essentially what they do is they took wood and they weave the boat together. And you weave the boat together with different kinds of wood so that when the different kinds of woods get wet, they shrink at different rates, and because of that differential shrinking, it essentially pulls the boat together and keeps it watertight. It's a fairly ingenious way to construct a watercraft, of course, without any modern materials, without nails and hammers and fiberglass and all the kinds of stuff we would use in modern construction today of a boat. That is how they put these boats together, and we know because we found one. And you can actually go see it when you're there. It's pretty neat. You get 30 seconds to look at it, but is it kind of like that? Yeah, pretty much. But there it is. There's the boat. Of course, the fish they catch and eat is tilapia. So when you go down to the Sea of Galilee, if you're wise, you have tilapia for lunch, because that's what Jesus' disciples ate, even after the resurrection. What do? Peter and his friends, they go out fishing, and they catch some fish, and they bring it back, and Jesus cooks it up for them, and what do they have? They have a nice meal of fresh tilapia. Okay, our resurrected Lord had tilapia down there, so that's what we had while we were there too. There's a monastery there that has a little restaurant that we ate at. Yep, this one did. And because there's not a lot of restaurants around there, like I said, this is the middle of nowhere. There's not much out there on the Sea of Galilee. All right. I think that before we dive off into the Sermon on the Mount, let's call it good there and ask if we have any questions. Do you remember all that? Spent a lot of time taking notes while we were there. It was one of the things we did on the bus. You go from place to place. You have to take notes of things. I really wanted to just nap because we were tired like all the time, but instead decided to take notes of all that. Most actually the talking wouldn't happen on the bus. Most of the talking would happen while you were there. But the tour group we were with had about 300 people. So I think there were 7 buses full of people. And so you had sort of what I call the tour lead guide, but then you had your individual guide that was with you on like an everyday basis. So you had a main guide who kind of talked to everybody when you were all in the one group, and then would rotate to the different groups. But in addition to them, you also had your own individual guide who was with you all the time, all the way, and you kind of got to know really well. Correct. A caravan of buses. Yes, and so that was why the logistics of getting from place to place, you can imagine, it's fairly complicated. It's like we need to get 300 people into this place and 300 people out of this place, and in any given day, especially up here in the Sea of Galilee, we might visit 6 different places in one day. Okay? I mean, we packed it in, man. We saw a lot of what there was to see. That was the reason why it was like, hey, you have 30 seconds to look at this, because we want to go look at this, and we want to look at this, and we got to go look at this, and we got to go look at this, because you have flown all the way across the world to come see this, and we want to get you to see as much as you can see. Yeah. It depends on where you want to go. It's not very easy for you as an American to go to Bethlehem because you are in the Palestinian-occupied West Bank. And so it's not very easy for you to get in there. Other parts of Israel, yeah, you could do that. You'd have to buy tickets through either the Israeli tourism ministry, which basically, we don't really have an equivalent in America, but basically you have a branch of the government that it's their job to manage tourism. Okay? And so you get with them and you say, hey, look, I want to go here, 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 here. And they're going to tell you, okay, well, the government owns these 5 sites, but the other 25, most of these places are actually privately owned. The government doesn't own them. So again, it's not like America, generally speaking, where it's like if you want to go see something, it's a public park or museum or something. Most of these things are owned by the church, by various churches. Either the Catholic Church owns it, or the Greek Orthodox Church owns it, or the Armenian Church owns it, or one of the other actual church bodies own these places. And so what you have to do then is you're going to have to coordinate with that church body that owns it. So yes, you can. The short answer is yes, you can, but you have to have some wherewithal to figure all that out. Or you can, of course, hire your own local guide who will take you through and do all these things for you, if you want to do it that way, rather than being in part of a big group. Since I had never been to Israel before, I prefer to go with this big church group of people who, the guy who is the lead of it, you haven't seen him yet, we haven't talked about him, but we'll get to him in a little bit. He's been to Israel 50 times, 60 times. He was a doctor of theology in ancient Middle Eastern cultures. And so he really has an extremely strong biblical and historical background in Israel. And so I really felt like it's an opportunity to learn quite a bit from him by going with his group. So that was why we chose to do it that way. Is that a fair, Shell? Fair statement? Yeah. That, and he's also a pastor of a church, and he's a really good preacher. He is just really, really interesting to listen to. And we didn't want to go and be bored, and because if you just get some guy that you've never met before, you don't really know what you're going to get. So, all right, let us then close with prayer, and we'll finish it up. Dear Lord, our Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to learn about the Holy Land, to learn more about your Son, Jesus, and all of the things, Lord, that you write about in your Word. Help us to internalize it in our hearts and in our minds, and to just think about you more, Lord, and all of the things that you were willing to do for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.